To the Bill, we're happy to.
Well, again, thank you, Mary, and thank you, Vicki. Again, it's great for us to be working with you also. So our first speaker today is going to be Ed Perkins. Ed is the co-chair of the IEEE Career Policy and Workforce Committee, and he's also the director-elect for Region 6, which is basically the whole western United States. So he's come in from Oregon to be with us today. And with that, I'll introduce Ed Perkins.
Thanks, Ed. Excuse me. Well, we have a good turnout here. This is good. This workshop, we've been doing this for about 5 years now in about, 12 to 15 different locations around the country where we've had meetings, and we've updated it over time. And it's a pretty intensive experience, so this is not going to solve all your career problems, but this is to give you an idea of what it is you need to do to manage your career. And ideally, your sections, when you go back, your PACE program, with Lee's encouragement, will be able to put follow-on programs that deal in depth in some areas like, how to do a resume, mock interviewing, things like that. So here's what we're going to cover today. We're going to do a little bit of introductions. I'm going to talk about globalization and its effect on careers. Then I'm going to talk about how you can adapt in the face of that. Dr. Henry Lindborg is going to come up and talk about career strategy and creative job. I'm not in the camera. And creative job search. And at lunchtime, Lee Stogner is going to give us a lecture on how the IEEE network and IEEE can help you. Charles Lord is going to come up and talk about working for yourself. Then Tarek Radiri is going to talk about resume development and interviewing. And then I'm going to come back and talk about emerging future areas for jobs. And then we'll have a wrap up.
Actually, can you guys in the back here okay, or can you hear me?
Okay. Now, in your material, in the white packet that you got are a bunch of handouts from the workshop. There's a thing. The first thing should be a list of exercises. What I did is I took all of in the workshop we talk about, you should go and think about this. You should develop a list of that. So I went and I put all that together. I ended up with 6 pages of stuff. So anyway, so this is at the front as a guide when you go home. Then in here, there's also some other handouts about self-assessments and networking and some other things that we'll use today. Okay. So first, usually at this point, we go around the room and we ask everybody to stand up and say a little about themselves, but we have such a big crowd here that that's not going to be practical. So we're going to do a little poll. So first of all, we want to know, first, Hank, are you going to come up and write? Okay. So first, we're going to get a show of hands. Wait for Dr. Lindborg to come up. He's going to be scribe. So first we want to know is, so how many people here are still employed? Okay, so most people are employed. Okay, that's good. Let me just keep your hands up. We just get a rough count. It's 50-50. Okay, so how many people are unemployed? Okay, so we've got 6, 8. Okay. The people who have been are unemployed. How many have been unemployed longer than say 3 months? Okay. Most people. Okay. How many people longer than 6 months? Okay, a few. Okay. All right. Good. If you are working, do you feel that you're underemployed? How many people feel they're underemployed? Okay, so we have a few people there. All right. And you had a question?
Yeah, I'm working part-time.
Oh, you're working part-time? Okay, okay.
That's what it is.
So you're underemployed? Okay, okay. All right. The question was somebody who's working part-time and are underemployed. So next thing to ask is how many people have a career plan? Any kind of career plan? Okay. So we got about 8. All right. How many people have a job search strategy? Okay, about 4, 5, 6. Okay. Any strategy. Okay. How many people have a recent resume? Ah, okay, a lot of people have a recent resume. Okay. And how many people have a network? About 6. Okay. Great, thank you very much. So that'll you're in the right place, let me tell you that. So I'm going to talk about globalization in your career. I'm going to talk about how employment has changed, what requirements of success there are as a result, how to adapt, and I'm going to talk a little bit about developing a career strategy and a creative job search, and Dr. Lindborg is going to go into that in more detail. Okay. Engineering has changed as a career, and you started out in the 1970s and 1980s. I don't know if people remember, but there used to be IBM. If you got a job at IBM, you were set because they never laid anyone off. I was from the New England area, so that was more familiar up there. So you had more like a lifelong career. There was a career ladder. You got benefits. You know, companies sent you off for training, so life was good. Then we got into the 80s, and technology started changing. People would switch jobs to go across the street because the company across the street's using the latest kind of TTL logic, and we're using, you know, the old TTL logic, and people were starting to move around, and continuing education became a necessity. Then we got into the 90s. Companies discovered that they could do core competencies and right sizings and all of that. People remember that. And so what emerged out of that was people started looking into the idea of having temporary employment contracts and being consultants. So now we've moved into the new millennium, and we're sort of into that area on steroids. So what we have is we have rapid deployment of new technologies and globalization. So another key thing is people now, employers, when they're looking to hire people, they're looking for certain sets of skills. So they're not looking to hire people. It used to be companies would hire, I work for a large multinational company, and we would go out and we had our college hiring program, and we would hire some people in, and we knew that they would have to be trained and educated and stuff like that. And some companies are still doing that for the college hires, but mostly companies want you to come in, walk right off the street, and be able to hit the job running. So we're looking for people who can come in and execute immediately. Also, there's this issue of needing access to global markets. So that's driving a lot of corporate behavior. So the key takeaway is that engineering is no longer what would be considered a core function in a lot of companies. We say, wait a minute, we're the engineers, we're the scientists, you know, we make the products. How can we not be a core function in the company? But the companies aren't being run by engineering anymore. So what you have is the core, and this work comes from Charles Handy's The Age of Unreason. So you've got a strategic aspect to the core, which is the culture, the intellectual property, revenues, the people who bring in the money are up here. Then you've got tactical, which are projects and services, which are related to sales. and then you've got support. So the farther you away from the core, the more likely is your job can be outsourced or globalized. So if you're tied to a project, projects will come and go. So you see this sort of project-based behavior in corporations. So the result of all of this is that the job market has shifted. So the career path is now your problem. You have to figure out your career path for the most part. There are still some companies that do that, but in general, you need to think about your career as your responsibility. There's this idea of, as we talked about, just-in-time employees. It's sort of a play on, remember just-in-time manufacturing, the parts would show up just when they had to stick them in the boxes that went down the line. So there's this concept that they can hire any skill they want just when they need it, and they'll show up, and then when they don't need them, they can get rid of it. Cost reduction, we've seen that in the early, right after the dot-com bust, and most recently, the last couple of years, cost reductions. Companies are trying to figure out how they can continue, so they're cutting costs everywhere. The web allows 24-hour development. Also, productivity, automation has enabled companies to get rid of people. And then we have outsourcing and offshoring. So basically, this turns into, we're facing a global competition for jobs. So we're not just competing here in the U.S., but we're competing with India, with China, Brazil, Russia, the emerging countries for jobs. And a key thing here is when the corporate leaders, when the executives are making decisions, they're not saying, "Oh, I wonder how this affects my workers in Florida." They don't think like that. They're looking at what they consider the bigger picture. So that's sort of the bad news. And when we started this workshop in 2005, we were looking at these things. And I recently ran across this book written by Jeffrey Moore in 2005 called Dealing with Darwin. And I thought it was very interesting because I was reading this 5 years later. And here he was in 2005, basically. He was saying this is what's going to happen. Growth market opportunities have been transplanted to Asia, and with them economic advantage, offers products incubated in low-cost economies expected to disrupt business models in established markets. And that's what's happened. I was wondering, why haven't I heard of this book before? Because Moore is a marketing guru. He tells people how to develop technology marketing plans. He's done, I think his books are Crossing the Chasm and In the Tornado. He's got a whole bunch of books out. And I got to a later part of his book, and then I discovered why this book hadn't become well known. So he has two. I'll get into that. He has two concepts in this book: core and context. And core is what differentiates a company's product from the others in the market. And it allows them to expand their market. And context is what keeps the company running, the operational processes. And there are critical and non-critical aspects to both of these things. So that's a couple of concepts. So, and the nice thing about this is that there's a website for Dealing with Darwin, which had a whole bunch of nice slides that I could use. So what he's saying basically here is, you have core creates a differentiation. If you have mission critical process, that means if the process doesn't work, you have an immediate risk. And then you have context over here, which is everything else. It's the order processing, the payroll, all the other aspects, HR. So differentiation is in core, and context is over here, and so this is just a two-dimensional thing with a quadrant thing with risk and differentiation. So basically the thing here is just to get the concept that that core, in his definition, is differentiation, and it's more mission critical than the other aspects. So if you can't differentiate yourself, eventually you're going to go out of business because somebody's going to come in basically and eat your lunch. So that was a message in the book. So then he talks about the cycle of innovation. And basically there's 4 stages. Product is invented. So some kind of new idea, some differentiation of the products is invented. Then it has to be deployed. So inventing is not really mission critical. It's not a critical path kind of thing. But deploying, once you've got it, once you've picked it out, that's mission critical. Get it deployed, get it into the market so you can capture that market. Then that's in the core side. Then once it gets deployed, it goes over into the context side. It has to be managed. You have to have the second release. You have to have support, sales, all that kind of stuff. And then when it gets mature, you can outsource the production to some other company. And then you make money over here that you feed back into the process over here to develop products. So that's basically Moore's cycle of innovation. So and let me go on to the next slide. So, as I said, something that starts out as a new breakthrough eventually becomes context. So let's say you had video games, cameras, color screens. So these things come out in cell phones as brand new things, and then eventually everybody's got those. So that's the driver that the corporations see, is that every new thing they come out with eventually is going to become a commodity, and they've got to keep coming up with new stuff all the time. So, what does this mean? I'm going to get to what this means for careers in a couple more slides. So what companies are doing is they're down here in inventing, and they're putting in resources. So here's where they're bringing in people. That's where they want all these niche skills. So they're bringing people in here. They're not putting people in here, but that's where you have to put them in to get your products deployed. And then you get a lot of resources over in context. So you get the sales department and the marketing department. And so you get people over here, and then you add people in for support. So what they have is they have a situation where the resources are not deployed around the company. This is Moore's thesis, for maximum advantage. And so what does this do with the workforce? So you do outsourcing. You've got the people over here. If we go back, you'll see that let's go back another slide. So you go back here, and the 4th step is when the product's mature, you can have somebody else manufacture for you, perhaps. So you've got extra resources down here. So what you end up with the thing is you've got this sort of like conveyor belt thing. Resources come in here, and then they get offloaded there, you get laid off, and there's no feedback mechanism. So his thesis is there needs to be a feedback mechanism. And the issue is that people being released don't have the skills to fill the new positions. And you hear this all the time in the job market. Companies, they're crying, I can't find anybody with any skills. Bring in people from overseas. We have no skills. What they're really saying is they move people through the maturity curve of their company, and they need to have recycling. So that's the thesis that Moore is talking about, is resource recycling. And so the people who do R&D can move into deployment to get the product out. Then they can go back into R&D and they can do more stuff. Or the people who go from R&D into context, or the market, this field support of that, they can move back into deployment. And the people who are in the support operations, they can move back into the early deployment part. So you can recycle people around in your company. Then you don't have this problem of this pipe where you have to keep bringing more people in. And so the work goes this way, and the people go that way. when I read that, I went and said, and he says, companies need to change how they do stuff. And so when I read that, I said, oh, that's why I haven't heard of this book anymore, because he's told all the corporate people they got to change the way they do business. You know, so now I understood why this book wasn't as well known as his other books. So that's his thesis. If companies could recycle people, then we wouldn't have this problem of there's no skills. But companies don't want to do that, because you get the guy over here in the sales department, he says, I bring in 80% of the revenue, I need 80% of the budget. Right? Well, you don't need 80% of the budget over here. You need, a lot of the budget over here to do your next thing, so you're going to stay in business. So there's all sorts of issues. It's a great book to read. You can pick them up on Amazon, I think, for like $10. So what's happening here? You've got management has compensation plans. They've got little fiefdoms. The guy in the sales department, the guy in the marketing department. Inflexibility, they're going to have to change, and inertia. So unless somebody at the top of the organization says, wait a minute, we got to do stuff differently, this isn't going to happen. But that to me, when I read that mirrored exactly what we've been seeing in the workforce. He wrote that in 2005. So the other thing he's talking about is you've got there's different kinds of tasks that are done in these areas. So in the invention zone, as he calls it, over here in the core area, you've got entrepreneurs and people who can think outside the box. That's cliche, but to invent new stuff. And then up here, you need program managers, because you have to get the thing deployed and you have to get into volume production. So you need program managers up there. And then down here, you want an optimization. You want to do cost reductions. You want to do whatever you can do so you can maximize your return on the investment. So you need process optimizers. So in his model, you do the R&D here, program managers there, and there's process optimizers down there, and then there's handoffs between these. So that's his model of how companies should be organized now to be competitive in doing innovation. And this is just to sum up on that. So his idea is that if you keep recycling people, so you've got different skills. You've got entrepreneurial skills here, program management skills here, optimization skills here. And if you're able to recycle your skills inside your company, then you've got a perpetual innovation machine. So anyway, so anyway, as I said, when I read that, I was excited. I went around to everybody I knew and said, hey, you got to read this book. You got to read this book. So what does that mean for us? Now that we've gone through the Moore's model of innovation. So as I said, we're in the era of just-in-time employees, which means basically employees are hiring skills they need when they need them. They don't want long-term commitments. They don't want to have to train people. And they don't want costly employee benefits. I know a friend of mine works for a company in Portland, and he says that they don't send anybody off to training unless they absolutely have to. They acquired a company that I think didn't use, I can't remember, like used Java, and they weren't using Java, they were using C++. So they sent everybody from the new company they acquired off to C++ class because they had to. But otherwise, they're not spending any money on sending anybody to training. So a lot of companies have that mindset. And like I said, they don't want ramp up delay. They want to bring you in, and you like just start typing away in your office. You don't have to read the specs. You're just going to type away and get that thing done. It's a fantasy, but employers believe that, hey, with so many people out, we can just wait and the perfect candidate's going to show up. So that's what's happening in the market. So what does this mean for us? It means that we all need to be independent learners, and you have to have a plan. You can be working in your office and your boss can come by on Wednesday and tell you, Fred, boy, you're doing great. You're my most valuable employee in the department. I'm really glad you're here. Keep up the good work. And on Monday, he can come by and say, Fred, I got bad news. I got to lay you off. Corporate decided that analog design has to be done in Germany. They do it better. Sorry. So I've actually had people come up to me after the workshop and say, you know, that happened to me. So it does happen. So what we have is there's a sort of a flow of careers. You have a challenge, a response, adapt, overcome, succeed, but then now you have to repeat it because the apple cart is going to be upset, and now you're going to have a new challenge. So you get laid off. You got to figure out how you're going to respond to all of that stuff. So some things that we're going to recommend here is that if you focus on what you do best and what you're interested in, then it's going to be a more enjoyable experience while you're doing adapting and overcoming and adapting and overcoming. If you're not, it's going to be a big pain. So you need to have a plan. You should look out for, you know, short-term and longer-term. You should look at your goals, external influences, talents, source of information, all sorts of things should feed into your plan. If you're employed and you have a plan for what your career is going to go inside the company, then you have to consider obviously the values and the culture of your employer. So okay, good. So this brings us back to the idea that you've got to think of your career as a business. Now, when I went to school, I didn't think of my career as a business. I was going to get out, I was going to get a good job at a company, and I wasn't a business. I was going to be a working guy. You know, I was going to be a working engineer and see if I could find some interesting work and do that. But now you can't do that. You got to think of your career as a business. So we're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about this concept of branding. And we're going to talk about the fact that you can't think of yourself as an employee. You need to think of yourself as a small business. We'll talk a little bit about career transitions. And in some instances, you know, you may end up, people find out that they have to go where the jobs are. Out in Oregon, where I'm from, we've had people who decided that the market's just not going to come back, and they've gone to Arizona, they've gone to California, they've gone to Washington, they've left the area and they've gone where they could find jobs. And the key thing is what employers are looking for, and let's get into this, is they want to know what value are you going to add? How are you going to help them make money? So that's, and we're going to talk about that. So what is a business model? So for your career, a business model would be, why do you want to make money? How do you want to make money? Because living here in the United States, you need to have money. If you don't have money, you're in a pretty bad situation, unless you're like living in a monastery or someplace like that. You've got to, you got to buy food, you got to buy rent, so you've got to have money. Everybody's got a business model. Whether it's unconscious, it may be unconscious. You may never have thought about, do I have a business model? But everybody's got a business model. So example, do you need a job to pay your bills? Do you have this concept of employability in your field? Do you have this concept of a life work that you want to do? You know, are you altruistic? You're trying to make the world better? You know, are you hoping to win a Nobel Prize? You know, everybody somewhere has some kind of concept. You know, why are they doing this? And if you know your motivation and goals, we're going to stress this, then you have a much better idea when you're looking out to figure out what you want to do next, of what will be good, what will fit, what will make you happy. So there's two aspects to this. First, we have work. So if you want work, basically, I want some work, I need some money. So the way to do that is if you have specialized services, tactical services, immediate, convenient, you know, contact me, I will come over and set up your Wi-Fi security, you know, $25, something like that. So now you've got a little business and you can get work. Another option is what we would call a job, where you want to have, you're looking for a longer term thing. Key thing here is the message that we want to give you is that people hire people they know and like, okay? When you send your resume in to the HR department along with 500 or 1,000 other people sending resumes into the HR department, they're going to filter stuff out and you may or may not get through the filter. So if you can have your network and you can figure out how to find out about the company, you can figure out how to find out about what they want, and you can get it in somehow into one of the hiring managers and become a known quantity in some method, either through employee referral or something like that, you stand a much better chance. So that's what we're going to get into later on in this workshop. So the other thing is, in order to do that, you have to sell yourself. So you've got a talent, you've got a skill. So, and to do that, you have to have a plan. So you have to know what it is you're trying to sell to these employers. You have to have a plan. You have to have a network. How are you going to go around and become a known and likable person to the employer? You need to test it and do some more. And we're going to talk about some of these other aspects a little bit later. I don't need to go into them at this point. So, what we're going to do right now for, how are we doing on time? Take like 2 minutes, 2 or 3 minutes, and write a couple of phrases. And this is not polished or whatever. This is just get you thinking about this. Of what is your business model? You know, why are you an engineer? Why are you a computer programmer? You know, what are you looking for? You know, I want steady work. You know, whatever it is for you, just think about that for a couple minutes and write that down. Okay, it looks like everybody's pretty much done. So this is just start. This is to give you guys an idea, some ideas, something to think about. When you get out of the workshop, go home, think about these things some more. We've got some more exercises as well coming up. Our next topic we're going to get into a little bit is branding. And branding was this big buzzword back in 2002, 2003. And a friend of mine was talking about it, and I said, branding? I'm not Kleenex, you know. I mean, why do I need a brand? What's a brand? So basically, so basically, where'd I put the color? It's your work reputation. What we mean by that is, let's say you're in a company, and if the management's looking down to see who's doing what in the organization, can they see you, or are you invisible? I was working on a project that was very important to my boss, and my boss's boss knew about it, but if I went up a couple more levels in the hierarchy, they had no clue I was doing that. And they were in the process of thinking about downsizing. So I'm thinking, that's not a good thing. You know, if the director or VP or whatever is looking around because they got to cut back, and they know, oh, Fred's a good guy. He's working on this project. That's a good thing. If they don't know Fred, they say, oh, we can get rid of all these projects. So that's a good thing to be able to do. Also, what is your peer group? What's your peer group think about what you do? And so you have to have this brand for the viability of your network, because basically, we had a guy come in and give a PACE talk about networking and branding, and he gave a great definition. He says it's the impression you leave behind. So that's why that fits into your network. Is you want to have, what impression do you want to have these people you're talking to about, gee, I'm looking for a job, I want to do this. What impression do you want to leave them with? So they'll have that in their mind, and they'll associate, when something comes up that is what you're interested in, they'll remember to associate you with that. Another key thing is, if you're working at a company, this is a concept from Tom Peters. He has this concept of braggables. So if there's a big important project in the company and you're somehow associated with that, then that should become part of your brand, especially in the company. You know, I did XYZ on the Framis project. So that's another factor that goes into that. Now, there's some website links in the resources section. Each module, there's a list in the back of resources. So there's a website called Shoestring Branding. And so here's a comment about resumes. It says branding effects is a multifaceted thing. Your resume, your elevator pitch, your business card, the whole thing has to be a package. So if you're trying to make a standard resume, what you may end up doing is making yourself look like a commodity. And if engineers are commodities, you really don't want to be a commodity. You want to be unique somehow, so that the employer will say, oh, this person's unique, I should talk to them. So one way that has come up in the last 5 years, much more so, is the ability to use social media and online systems to do branding. So you've got LinkedIn. We'll cover some of these things if in the workshop. So you've got LinkedIn. You've got a blog. You've got websites, things like that. So you can create, using these things, you can create an image of what you offer on the web, which becomes part of your brand. Because right now, what people do, when HR or somebody gets a resume from somebody, they'll go on, they'll Google them. Okay, so that's a key technique. Today's Engineer, there's some articles. I think Elizabeth Lyons wrote an article about that. So when they Google, what do they find for you? You know, so you can put stuff up there that creates a brand that you want people to know about you when you do that. So that's a strategy. Do you have some people, depending on how far you want to go with this, you can get a URL with your name, like, edwardgperkins.com, something like that. You can have a web page with a blog. You can be on Facebook, although there's pluses and minuses to Facebook, but you can be on LinkedIn. LinkedIn is very good. A lot of recruiters now are looking through LinkedIn to find people to match recs that they have, okay? They don't want to go through put an ad and get thousands of resumes. They're out trying to mine people out of the social network. So if you're you need to have a presence in the social network, but you need to make sure the presence provides the right impression. So branding is about having the right impression. Now, I ran into one guy a while back, and what he was doing was he didn't have a blog, but he was in one of these forums. I think it was about Verilog simulation. So he was in there, and he was answering people's questions about Verilog. And so eventually he became sort of, oh, this guy, he's the expert about Verilog, or he got this brand that he was being, so he would companies would contact him, about coming to work for them. So that's another, way you might, if you have some certain area of expertise, write a blog, be tracking the industry, whatever, to give, create that fact that you know what you're talking about. So we are now done with the initial module. So I'm a little ahead of time, which is good because we can now take some questions. I was trying to make sure we had a little bit of overlap time. So anybody have any questions? Yes.
How do you balance the need to have an internet presence with privacy, identity theft, people, weirdos out there?
Right. So the question is, how do you balance having a presence on the web with privacy? Yeah, and you've got to be careful of that. Like I have a LinkedIn site. I do not have my home address. I don't have a phone number. I don't have any. I'm just in Oregon, or maybe Portland, Oregon area. Okay, and LinkedIn is sort of good because you have a public profile and you have a private profile, so that if you have people in your network, they can see more about you than the public can. But yeah, you've got to, so just don't stick your resume up with your your phone number and all of that. Some people do that, but you can balance that. There's another site called Plaxo. I haven't used that too much, but that's got a similar thing to LinkedIn, but they have more gradations. They have people who are your friends, people who are your associates. So they have like 2 or 3 levels of ability to filter people.
LinkedIn is most popular nowadays?
LinkedIn is most popular, I would say, as a professional site.
80 million people and counting.
Yeah, Lee says there's 80 million people on LinkedIn. There's also a lot of managers and senior decision makers, and HR does a lot of searching on LinkedIn. So if they need an embedded systems engineer for automotive control, they'll search through LinkedIn and see who shows up, and then they'll contact people. I found your resume on LinkedIn or something like that. So
with a little practice, if you're trying to target a company, you can use LinkedIn in an hour or two and do an org chart. You know exactly who to contact.
Yeah. As Lee says, if you can. One thing you can do in LinkedIn is you can look for a company. So you want to use some company you're interested in. You can say who in LinkedIn works for that company, and now you get a list of employees at that company, and then you can look in your network and you can find out. If you have a network in LinkedIn, you find, here's somebody who's one hop away from somebody I know who's at that company, and then there's a way in LinkedIn where you have to pay them money, but you can get this ability to do an introduction, so you can contact the intermediate person and introduce yourself and become known to them. They're comfortable, and then they'll give you an introduction to this other person. So there's a lot of ways to use LinkedIn to do that. Yes.
A little bit more of an opinion-based question that I have for you. I understand how the engineer there that has been changing over the last 40 years. I'm just thinking of where we are right now. With the contracts and all this, it seems to some degree unsustainable. I mean, at some point this has to break.
Right, yeah, because the question is this current idea of hiring people with skills and no long-term training, is that sustainable? And I tend to think that, how can it be sustainable if you have to have certain core knowledge in your company and you're relying on contract people? At some point, where's your institutional knowledge of stuff? And so I'm wondering to see when this sort of short-term focus is just going to be, it'll be, toppled over of its own, its own weight. But in the meantime, we've got to play the game. So, other things on the web?
We have a question from Western North Carolina. The question is, how do you see a company's innovation model change with the economic situation? When they start to make more profits, will they go back to the model where innovation is back in their core?
Okay, could we have a question from the web? Did you get that on the, okay. All right, I don't have to repeat it. Okay, good. I'm not a big marketing guru like Gordon Moore, but what I would think, this is my own personal opinion, is that if companies are going to have to do at some point, this sort of short-term focus is going to run out of steam, which is sort of what the other person's question was. And if companies haven't figured out how to have a long-term innovation strategy, they're going to be hurt. And the company is going to be like dealing with Darwin. I think that's why he called the book Dealing with Darwin. If you are not focused on the long term, what you've got to do to be sustainable, and you're focused on the short term stuff, eventually you're going to fail, and you're going to have new companies. So, I mean, we may end up seeing that. I don't know, but otherwise, I don't know if that answers the question, but do you have any thoughts, Lee?
I think the world has evolved. There might be a combination of going back to innovation. You may have to go to the next company that's starting up if you want to be in the innovation core, but companies are moving on.
Yeah. Is there any other questions from the web?
No.
Okay, all right. So why don't we got to switch recordings, right? Okay, so why don't we, we'll wait a couple minutes. Oh, we have one more question. Okay, yes.
As a student, hearing that skills are looking for someone to hit the ground running, how do you get the skills to hit the ground running?
Internship. Yeah. I mean there are people who are still doing college hire programs. Okay, so there's still some of that going on. Internships are really key because you go out and you work at a company and you get some experience what they do. And then we had last night at dinner, there was somebody from, was it Emory-Riddle University? Yeah, and she says they require their students to I think sophomores, junior, senior year to have an internship, and they have to go to a different company. They can't go back to the same company, so they get a breadth of experience working for different employers. So then when you get out, you've got on your resume, you've got to have some actual experience that you've gone out and you've done something in the industry. Yes, in the back.
I understand that you have your career now, so you can into the direct. But how do you decide between thinking of it with the advantages of it being a metaphor and actually starting a new company?
We're going to get into that.
Ed, try to repeat the question.
Yeah, the question was, so given that you have to think of your career as a business, how do you figure out if you want to really become a business or you want to continue being an employee? And we're going to get into that after lunch. Charles Lord's going to talk about how to determine, which ways you should go. And we're going to get into a little bit of that in the next module, in the back.
Say you want to be seen when you're in a corporation,
Yeah.
higher up. how high should you aim? The CEO you work in, or have your VP of manufacturing?
Well, it depends, how high, when you want to be seen in your company by management, how high does that go? It depends on sort of how big your company is. Okay, so where is the decision-making power that could affect, you know, your long-term career? If you're in a small company, it's probably good for the CEO to like you. If you're in a larger company, you know, maybe your VP or your group, you know, your group manager would need. You have some thoughts on that?
And one comment is in some large rigid companies like GE, if you go outside of your immediate group and try to say something to the senior VP, it can be a mark of death.
Yeah, right. So you got to look at the corporate culture too. So you don't want to. The comment was some organizations are very rigid, so you've got to be inside your little vertical, and so if you go outside of that, all of a sudden now you're making trouble because you're going outside the chain. So you got to look at. Yeah. So well, no, you got to make sure that you're in your company. You're not going to be viewed as why did you go talk to this guy? You know. Tarek has a great story. I think he's probably going to tell with his resume about in his talk about how to manage that. But the other thing you can do is you can volunteer for projects. Okay, so maybe there's some organized, I don't know, some company picnic, or you know what I mean, some kind of, you know, the United Way, something you can volunteer for, you know, and demonstrate that, you know, hey, I did a great job doing this stuff. So, you know, you can do, you know, just things like that. Yeah. Are we ready to? Okay, we got a couple more questions. Okay.
Would it be helpful to list your visibility network of your LinkedIn status on the resume?
The question is, should you put your LinkedIn information on your resume? I was thinking that might not be a bad thing. Just put on, you know, like you have a website, you list the website, or you could list, you know, put your LinkedIn profile. They give you an ID number. I think it's hexadecimal or something or other, you know, and put that on your resume. So here's how to find me on LinkedIn, right? And then it saves them as a Google step, right? There was one other question. Oh, yes.
Yeah, the LinkedIn thing, yeah, you have a name, okay, so just put on your LinkedIn.com/Kenya.
Okay, yeah. Yeah, the comment was that you could probably put your name in the LinkedIn. I'm not sure how LinkedIn works externally, so, yeah. But yeah, whatever public way to get to your profile, that's probably not a bad thing to put on your resume. Okay, so we're going to pause for 2 minutes while we set the recording up to record the next module. So.